Now, most of the vacuum pumps have the exhaust at the top. So we talked about where all the valves were in our chamber. The valves are at the top where it's exhausting. In this case, this one exhausts right through this little hole right at the very top here. So here we see that little hole. And on this brand, that's where the handle is located. This particular model has the oil fill plug right here. And right on this side, this is where our hoses will be connected. And sometimes these get worn out. So here's another brand, but this brand exhausts its exhaust right here through the cap. But you can see also that's at the very, very top. And the reason for that is that we get as least amount of moisture into that oil as possible. And on this brand, here's our gas ballast. So we would loosen our gas ballast here. So we allow it to bypass that smaller chamber. So we're pulling it down fast, but not as deep. Once we get about 1,000 or 3,000 microns, we can close that off. And here's where we're going to hook our hoses up to it. And then we have our carrying handle. This is the pump that we took apart. This is the last one that we used. We can see the gas ballast is here on this first one. The gas ballast is here in the second one. And here's the third one. This one does not have a gas ballast, so it doesn't allow us to do that operation. What it does have is this tag on here, and this tag says, notice, open the 1/4-inch input cap for easy startup. Close the cap tightly to begin evacuation. So when they start this pump up, it wants to leave this one loose. Once the pump gets running, then you tighten it up. It doesn't work the same as the gas ballast. Now this one exhausted through the top through the handle. This one exhausts through the cap, and this one exhausts right here. Now let a school borrow my equipment when they were getting started, and they absolutely busted this up and never bothered to replace any of my equipment. What's cool about this model is it has this little screw cap on it, little screen on it. What we can do is attach a water hose to this, and if we're pulling a vacuum in a very enclosed space, I can actually hook this up to a water hose and run it outside of the connection or the area I'm working. That way, as I'm exhausting that moisture and the oil and any possible remaining refrigerants, it allows it to exhaust separate from the room I'm working with. So it's a really nice benefit. Now again, there's many different brands. I'm not promoting any individual brand of equipment. No matter what brand you use, it's important to make sure you take care of it. You make sure you change the oil frequently and often to make sure it's going to last a long time. And again, what's more important than the size of the pump, the CFM, is going to be the hoses and the restrictions. In other words, removing valve cords, which we're going to talk about soon. The size of the pump, though, isn't quite as important as those hoses. Jim Bergman does a great video that has a 2 CFM pump outperforming, I think it's an 8 or 12 CFM pump. So before you spend all your money on the pump, let's take a look at the hoses. That's going to be coming up very soon. So it's a pretty cool process. Pumps in through our top side, through our chamber, and then once we close the ballast, it goes from this chamber into the second chamber, and we're able to pull down to a very, very low amount of vacuum. So the key is you keep them maintained, you keep them serviced, you keep that oil change constantly. That's the thing I can't stress enough, is keeping that oil changed. Once you keep the oil changed, everything else can be serviced. We can replace these rubber O-rings here, we can replace the rubber rings there, the rings there, but what I've found is if you keep the oil changed out, these rings will hardly ever go bad. The biggest thing that needs to be changed out is the little Teflon ring that usually goes right here. Most of them have some kind of a little valve that you can open and close, and that's where they'll start leaking more than anything. But that's all rebuildable. And regardless of which pump or which brand you choose to go with, keeping that oil change is essential to the life of that pump. Where a lot of technicians will throw this pump back into the truck, they don't take care to where this cord is and how this cord's protected. And over time, moving this back and forth, it gets worn, it starts to crack, and it becomes frayed. That frayed is going to cause an issue, and it'll actually cause the motor to burn out. So whichever pump you're using, make sure you keep the cord protected, wrapped up decent, where it's not bouncing around and bumping up against things. And if you take care of your vacuum pump, it's going to last a long time. Also, what's important about vacuum pumps is making sure that you RTFM, read the manual. And again, taking care of the pump and the hoses and restrictions are going to be more important than the pump itself. We're going to be talking about that very soon. One of the benefits of this machine is it has this little chamber right here. And this is cool because any contaminants that's flowing out of that system, they'll drop in here. Even if we're pulling or some of that oil is traveling with the air when we're first starting that vacuum, it'll get hung up in this chamber before it mixes with our vacuum pump oil. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to put a little bit of oil in here, a little contaminated oil, and let's see what happens when we pull that vacuum. All right, put a little bit of contaminated oil in here. This is some actually vacuum pump oil from one of the other examples we had. And I've sealed off all of the other connections at the top of this pump. Let's turn it on and see what happens. And here you can see the moisture bubbling out of this oil. Now if we had refrigerant in there, a refrigerant mixed with that oil, you would see it bubbling very, very rapidly. And here's what the oil looks like while we're pulling a vacuum.